Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Profit Minds podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch, creator of the Profit Minds Growth System, a unique blend of profit growth, productivity acceleration, and building robust business process for scale. In every episode, I interview entrepreneurs and small business owners from around the world with a unique story to tell. You can find the show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Well, hi, everyone. Today, my guest is Jill James, founder and CEO of The Jill James, a business strategist who specializes in helping self-funded enterprises. Today, we'll be debunking some of the misconceptions around how to do well while you're doing good. Welcome, Jill.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so as you know, the first question that I ask every guest is, how did you get here? What's your story? What drives you?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I have a little bit of an odd path. I'm from a very small town in central Wisconsin. Both sets of my grandparents had their own small businesses, which I didn't think much about growing up, but I did spend my summers working in them and from the time I was 6. So I think that was pretty formative for me. In small towns, you can't get more customers. At least you couldn't when I was growing up, right? We didn't have the internet yet. So every person who came through the door mattered. Every relationship mattered. And I think that was really formative for me in seeing how both of them ran their businesses and living in the communities where, people knew them and how they operated. And then I did a 180, and out of college, I went to investment banking, which is the opposite of that you possibly have of let me go run a drugstore in northern Wisconsin, right? I started out in New York in investment banking, and I'm a very curious person, so I would look for where would I learn the most in a job, and they kind of threw us into the deep end, and it's a really wide ranging. You have to learn economics and accounting and law and, business dynamics and people. And it was just an amazing first job. But I did realize really quickly that my job was to take for companies and people who already had a lot of money, how do we make their money into more money? And coming from where I came from and seeing some of the write-off amounts, things like that, like the budget of my town was the margin of error on the first portfolio I managed. And that really sat with me of, hey, this could really make a difference in people's lives. And we're just, saying this $3 million doesn't matter. Let this first year manage it. And that, that was very meaningful for me, and seeing what are the things that I can learn from this job, but maybe how could we use these skills and tools differently to benefit more people. And I carried that with me throughout my career. I went from investment banking to personal financial advisory, which taught me a lot about working with small business owners and building wealth. And then from there, after I went back to business school at the University of Chicago, I ended up in tech startups. So that was much more around how do we take venture money and accelerate small businesses. So from those three really more, background experiences, I got a sense of how do we build big businesses? How do we make money into more money? And what I found myself when I moved to Los Angeles was there were a lot of people here who were very creative and didn't know that much about business or didn't have a lot of business background. So what I found myself doing was getting pulled into these, they wanted to call themselves startups, but they were really small businesses, by someone who had, a quality idea, but had never run a business before. And they were good at either they had great customer relationships or they were really good at sales, but how to put together and run the business, how to talk to investors, how to really develop a consistent, profitable business that could be a generator of growth, generator of jobs. How do we do that? And so I became the operations side and finance side for several of those founders. And after a couple of those, I had people approaching me and saying, I can't afford for you to come in-house. And I was a little bit tired of the 18 to 24 month roller coaster of 100% employed 100 hours a week and then nothing. So I decided which was in 2015 when I was 7 months pregnant with my son, that I would start my own business. I know, great timing. Um,
That's perfect.
I do everything the easy way. So I started my own business with a couple of those people that had said, hey, I don't care how much or how little you can help me. Any help you can give me would be very much appreciated. Like, please let me be your client. So that's how I got started. Back in 2015, there wasn't a lot of fractional COO work, but that was kind of how we started. And over time, the business has really evolved into, I was working with both self-funded and venture-backed companies, a wide variety of founders. And really over time, what I found was I was working with, solely with self-funded companies, mostly female founded, not exclusively, but mostly. And, really figuring out this common set of problems that I think in particular, a lot of women who have been in corporate and want to accomplish something with their careers and hit a roadblock and decide to divert into entrepreneurship and see, like, maybe I can do what I want to do over here. How would I do that? So really, I've evolved into using all these skills and background of, private wealth, personal wealth, how ventures get started when they have money, and then things that we can do with the finance system on an individual level. How do we do that to really keep the integrity of what they want to accomplish in their companies?
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about that challenge of the passion of doing this work, which probably, I'm guessing that many of these, let's say women, but these entrepreneurs, they do this because they care about the impact they can make, right? And how do you balance that against running a profitable business? What's the, I have my own theory, but I'd love to hear what your experience tells you is that big challenge there. And how do you get going down that path?
Yes. So one of the first way that I work with most of my clients is called the Business Design Boot Camp. Many of them have been in business for 2 or 3 years and have hit this wall where they started out with the first set of clients, their personal network, a thing that they were doing before that they kind of knew already, and have gotten into running a company and realized there was a whole bunch they didn't know about running a company. And also maybe that first idea that seemed like the idea might not be the idea, right? It's not quite getting them where they want to go. So often, like when we take a step back and say, like, why did you decide to do this? Like, what got you started and what was getting you out of bed in the morning? Very often it was something they wanted to impact in the world. It might have been equity driven. It might have been around they never felt they were paid fairly. And this is the way that they can create fair compensation for themselves and others. It might be a driver of change in the world that they want to see happen. But often it goes back to something that is very purpose driven. And sometimes they're asking questions like, can I really have both things, right? Can I build the personal wealth that I'm looking for and also make a tangible change and impact a tangible change? So we often try to boil down to, like, what would be one meaningful change that if you did this in your business, you would feel good every day about waking up and doing this? And we answered that question as a pillar before we get into the other aspects of designing their business. Very often that creates clarity around, does everything else meet this criteria? Do the things we're talking about fulfill that goal? And so when we create a simple set of filters around the things that matter to that founder, it lets them imprint those values and goals onto every decision we make in the business, into the people we invite in to work with us. And it protects the integrity of what they want to do in the world while we figure out what are the mechanisms that let us do it.
Interesting. But this is not necessarily running a B Corp, right? This is
No. In fact, I think there's a bit of B Corp is like a shiny name for, I have a standard set of things and accountability that I've signed on for that you can say, you can understand how I'm operating and it's a shortcut. But there's, any business can be a social enterprise. Any business can be
sure.
socially driven. So, I do have a lot of people who come to me and say, well, is it B Corp or is it not for profit? And we go through like, you can design your own social enterprise. This can be choose your own adventure, right? It just, do you want that accountability to say there is a third party looking over your shoulder saying, did you give what you said you were going to give? Or can you be trusted to do the thing that you said you were going to do? And is there a marketing value for you? And, being part of a B Corp, but, B Corp is a C Corp. And for a lot of people who are, looking to build personal wealth, a B Corp might be limiting. So, there are some things underlying, depending on what they want to do, right? And what they're trying to accomplish with the work, that structurally, we're not answering the structure question first, right? B Corp, not for profit, LLC. It's more of a question of like, what are we trying to do? And then what's the structure that will fit this best?
Right. And it's some kind of balance between making that social impact and gathering that personal wealth, or making the difference in your own life, right? The impact in the business and the impact in your own life, whether that's time or money or whatever it is, right? What's the driver? Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way, to start to frame it. I've had people who have said, "Hey, I'd like to bring people who have trouble accessing this industry. I would like to create positions for them. Maybe we are overstaffing some of our, our shoots or our factory a little bit. Like, but I want to bring people in, and that's where we're going to use the money. I'm going to give people the opportunity to learn this craft, to learn this field, to get a credential, to put something on their resume, so they can break into my industry." So there are other ways to do it, just beyond time. So I think this is really like the crux of what we do for a reason, is asking this question first, because it really does start to frame, for me, mine is, how do I help 10% more women every year be successful as entrepreneurs? And so I really look at that every year, and like how I set my goals and what things I decide to do next for my company, because some of it is like the people who have worked for me, often almost all of them have started their own companies.
Mhm.
And so that, for me, like, that counts. That's
Yeah.
meaningful,
Yeah.
right? They earned a fair wage while they worked for me. They were smart and they learned everything and read all the materials, and then they went out and started their company. So, I think in that way, some of these things maybe just we need to think a little more creatively. And sometimes that's the guidance of, how could you do this? What would make it meaningful for you? And many people, it's giving someone else the opportunity that they didn't have in a corporate career.
That's great. And then that question, the answer to that question then becomes a filter for virtually everything else you do to help them. Is that a proper interpretation of?
Yes. Yes. I think,
uh,
and over time, as we plan each year, as we look forward of like, what is the next thing? Where do we go with this? It becomes, a filter system for us to say, does that live up to, what we want to do? I had a longtime client come to me a few months ago, and she was trying to think about, I have these different opportunities. I could buy one of these companies to grow faster. And the thing she was most excited about, when we put it through the filter that she's had for 5 years, you know, there was something that really, really aligned. And it was just so obvious once we put it through that filter, and everything came together and went really quickly because it fit with what she had already built, instead of kind of the shiny thing that looked the sexiest and had the biggest name attached to it. So, that I have seen this over time work really well for my clients. And if they have the discipline to stick with it and use it consistently, it really does help to, with hiring, is this person going to buy into the things that we want to do in this company that are different, right? We're not going to take somebody else's playbook just because we've reached a certain size. We're not plugging into scale a certain way. We will scale the way that we've scaled up to this point, and we're going to keep the integrity of our growth. So I see that more and more as the companies that I work with have grown and moved to new phases of business.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. Um, the whole question of paying yourself versus doing good versus plowing it all back in. How do you talk to your clients about that kind of, because again, they're doing things with this filter, and how does that filter play a role in balancing, they're paying themselves, which,
Sure.
every business should pay. Listen to this, clients. Every business should pay the people who are doing the work, even if you're the owner. That's not the profit. That's the pay for the work that you're doing. But how do you balance that?
Yes, +1 on that. Um, so that is the second piece. So once we've defined this purpose, we also have to look at what's their motivation. What is going to get you out of bed? Whether you're going to feel good about putting your time into a year from now, 2, 3 years from now, because we don't want to build the foundation of a business that you wake up 2 or 3 years from now and you're like, oh God, I hate working here, right? And I've seen many founders suddenly, follow a path where it's just about where is the growth going to come from, and they wake up 2 or 3 years down the road and they're like, I don't like doing this. I don't like this company, right? How do we get this back to something that I want to do? And one of the big pieces around that is being honest about what you need from a personal wealth standpoint. Like, what do you want to earn from the company while you do the work of growing it? And I don't put any judgments on that with my clients. I just ask them, like, is there a structure? I've had people say, I want to make $500,000 in 3 days a week. And that to me is just a problem to be solved, right? Then who do we need to staff? What kind of systems do we need, right? If you want to grow like that, like, you're going to need to give up some control, and we're going to have really good SOPs, and we're really going to need to, invest in high quality people. But there are ways to run businesses that suit, the life that you want to have, the amount of money that you want to make. And for many of my clients, it's about equity, about how do we have great benefits? How do we save money for retirement? Like, how do we take care of the people who are contributing, along with us? Like, how do we bring everyone along on this journey? So I think in that is a business design question. Like, again, that's part of what they want to do with the company, is, use the profitability to help themselves and help others, right? It's not just how do I get ahead, it's how do we all benefit from the work? How does everyone feel good about the work we're doing here and also benefit? So being honest about the compensation that you want, and then thinking about a smart way to do it. For a lot of people, they'll throw out that, whatever they think is a really big number. And then we'll start to talk about, well, maybe we should put some of it toward retirement, or maybe, there's a smarter way to compensate you than just pay you this money. So that, that's part of, the strategy that we can use in the more conventional pieces of bringing that to bear. But I do think it's extremely important to be honest with yourself of, if I'm doing this work and putting this into it, this is what I want to get out of it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the equity thing. I'd love to delve a little bit more into, how does that play out for, I mean, if you want to tell a story or give an example of one of your clients who's doing some really good work. I mean, it's something that I'm passionate about myself. And so I'd love to hear a story or two about how that's playing out in the lives of your clients and the businesses that they run.
Sure. I think of, I've had a longtime client called Coven in Maine. They're a hair extension company. And one of the things that was very important to the founder, Dafina Smith, when she started the company, was she wanted transparency along the supply chain, right? Because this is human beings who've grown hair on their head in other countries, and then it goes through a factory where a lot of people have to do very, kind of hand-driven, like hand tying hair onto a string and then bringing it into the company where hairstylists are putting it on somebody's head. And at all of these points along the way, there are a lot of unethical practices that take place to keep prices down. So it was, what kind of company do we have to have so that our supply chain is ethical, right? What kind of price points do we have to support? What kind of suppliers do we need to work with? Like, is this possible? So that's always been like, is this, again, supporting our ethical supply chain along the way? And so each of those decisions as we go forward is, and a lot of this is impacting women who are part of the supply chain. So do the forward decisions we make help the hairstylists that are specialists in extension? Does it help them improve their businesses? So she now has an academy where she not only teaches how to use the product, but also how to improve running a small business, because most of them are small business owners. So I think in that example, sort of like, how do we make sure that everyone along the way is fairly compensated for the product, has led to a luxury brand, right? It's going to have to be high price,
Of
right?
course.
Most of us with small businesses cannot compete on price, right? You just have to accept you're going to run a high cost, high price business. And then, that's where we get our margins from. So you need to build your business in that way. But because she's been so consistent in that, the Real Housewives wear her hair. So,
How about
yeah.
that?
Yeah.
That's cool. So let's talk about profitability. Do
Yes.
you have trouble with clients who say, what should I have as a profit? What does profit mean? Because I have this question all the time with my clients, right? What does it mean to be profitable? And again, as I said earlier, right? Some of them just say, well, the profit is what I get to pay myself at the end of the day after I have all my expenses paid, right? So talk to us about profitability and profit metrics and what matters there.
Sure. So in the business design bootcamp, one of the things we do is we start to get into modeling the products that they're offering, whether services or products. We look what their flagships are and really look at what is the gross margin when we count for what you have to pay yourself to run the company, right? What you have to bake your cost in there, which is, I think, what most people forget in assessing their profit margin when they work in their business. They leave themselves out of the cogs. So we are never accounting for the really expensive time that you as the founder, right? Or they put themselves into like $85 an hour, right? So I don't let anyone put themselves in for their time in less than $250 an hour. So that we're fairly compensating for the opportunity cost of what they could be doing. And then we look at what is it going to take from the point of sale to the point of delivery, and really how much are we profiting? And as we design that out, we don't work with any products that have less than a 30% gross margin. That is the floor. It does not make the cut. We will not continue forward with it if it is not at 30%. We try to be higher, 40 or 50, but everything is around gross margin, because in a self-funded business, whether you're going to pay back loans or pay yourself or pay for growth out of organic sales, all of that, every sale has to contribute as a driver. So we don't do loss leaders. We don't do low gross margins. We only do things that are over 30% in a gross margin context. And I found this really powerful, that most often where people are feeling stuck in their business, it is when we do this exercise of looking at what we call their unit profitability. We find that they're really more like 12 to 15% when they thought they were above 30. And when we rework the product to be above 30, immediately it changes the dynamic of the business with every single sale that they make, when we have everything contributing at the level that it should be. And then that helps with our forecasting, because we are actually seeing cash come in that we can use for growth objectives.
Right. Yeah, it's so powerful when you actually look at the numbers and understand, what value you're bringing. I mean, of course, the other thing that happens, of course, is that if you don't have those kinds of gross margins and you're not making money and you can't afford to pay the service provider, then you don't really have a business, because it has no value outside of yourself, right?
Yeah,
And that's
right.
just I call it a glorified job, but yeah, it's so important to make sure, and I hope the listeners are really getting this, right? It's really important to understand the value that you are bringing to the work that's being done, especially in the kinds of things that you're working with, Jill, businesses where people are providing a special kind of service, and really trying to make an impact beyond themselves.
Yes. Yeah. I do find, you may find this with the folks that you work with, a lot of people come to me and say, I would feel so great if I hit this revenue number. Right. But then we start to talk about what they want from the business. And it's always like $1 million. Everybody has $1 million in their mind. I want to get to that 7-figure number. And I was like, well, even at $1 million, the way you're running your business, you still couldn't pay yourself. Right. $1 million is just a vanity metric. It might feel good. It might be fun to like put in your year-end newsletter, but does it do for you what you want it to do? So I've had people come to me with $1 million, and we realize like they can get to their objectives at 750. other people, like the right number, is a little bit higher, but it's really, what is the revenue number that's going to drive what you need to fund the rest of the things that you want to do, including paying yourself. So, I do encourage people to get away from looking at just like, oh, my life would be so great if I just hit this 7-figure number and everything would be good. I can't tell you how many businesses I've started working with where like, I thought when I was making $1 million, I would be paying myself like, at least 150,000. And it's just the underlying financials of the business don't allow for it. Like we can get them there, but the business hasn't been structured in a way to thoughtfully say at this revenue level, we should, be able to pay me this much. And that means this for how we run the company.
Wow. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, Jill, what's the best way to reach out?
Sure. My website is The Jill James. I write a weekly newsletter. It's all focused on tips for self-funded business owners. And that's thejilljames.com/newsletter. So those are 2 great ways to get in touch with me.
Great. Yeah. And that concludes our show. Thanks again to my guest, Jill James at The Jill James. She's a business strategist who specializes in helping self-funded enterprises. I hope you learned something about how to run a profitable company that makes a difference. I know I did. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Profit Minds podcast. This is your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch. Please visit www.profitminds.net for other episodes or to contact me. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others. Thanks for listening. Have a grateful day.